Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us virtually for this timely show here at the Atlantic Council on the economic and political implications of Argentina's midterms. We have 45 minutes, but there's a lot to talk about over the course of this time. Argentina's elections this past weekend marked a decisive moment for President Javier Milei and his reform agenda that we'll talk about today. I'm Jason Marzek, Vice President and Senior Director here at the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. Yesterday at the Atlantic Council, we produced one of our signature fast thinking. And as I wrote yesterday, what was incredibly surprising was that against expectations, President Milei's coalition, La Libertad Avanza, it secured a sweeping victory really across the country, including most notably in Buenos Aires province, where his coalition actually lost in provincial elections by about 14 percentage points earlier in September, and then went ahead and won in Buenos Aires province this past weekend. This gives the congressional backing needed to defend a legislative agenda and to move things forward into the next phase. Also, as you'll see in our fast thinking yesterday, my colleague Ignacio Albe put together a great graph that looks at the composition and the chamber and the Senate when the Congress reconvenes in December. And there's now over 100 seats between Milei's La Libertad Avanza and its main ally PRO in the Chamber of Deputies. Meaning that the two allies are not that far off, especially when you include other potential allies, from even getting closer to a majority, which would not have even been thought of prior to the sweeping victory on Sunday. The results were not only a milestone, but also a reaffirmation of the Argentine government's economic program. And for markets, it's also a sign that fiscal discipline and structural reform are here to stay. For the United States, which recently deepened engagement with Argentina through a new $20 billion credit swap, it also signals that Washington's bet on Argentina's economic stabilization is paying off. And we saw the responses from President Trump, Secretary Bessent, and others with regard to the election. Still, challenges remain. Low voter turnout, lowest since the return to democracy, and the implications on this on voter apathy are something to talk about. And the question really now is also, how will the government turn this political momentum into sustained economic transformation? Because this is really also the key to our work at the Atlantic Council, is turning this momentum into long-term economic benefits that can be further unlocked for the Argentine people. The government's agenda is now supercharged. And as we honored Milei at our Global Citizen Award ceremony in September, we did so as a recognition of his economic achievements, but also of a recognition of the work to come. And there is a lot of work to come over the course of the next couple of years. So to unpack all this, I'm thrilled to be joined by three great experts and friends of the center. Alejo Cerwanco. Alejo is a member of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center's Advisory Council. He's also Chief Investment Officer for Emerging Markets Americas at UBS Global Wealth Management. Welcome. Great to have you join us, Alejo. Also, Kezia McKeague. Kezia is an Argentina expert, Managing Director for Latin America at McClarty Associates. Great to have you join us as well, Kezia. And finally, Martin Mulhesian, who's a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomic Center and a former IMF staff member. Martin and Alejo are also contributors to the fast thinking that came out just yesterday. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in here. And Alejo, let's start with you. A lot of attention right now to the markets. The markets have been watching these elections very closely. And the scale of Milei's victory sits at the most optimistic end of expectations going into the elections on Sunday. In response, we saw Argentine equities rise on Monday as much as 50%. Bonds have recovered significantly. The peso jumped as well. All clear signs of the market's optimism for the short and medium term following these results. What's the market seeing?
Absolutely, Jason. I'm so happy to be here. Cheers from New York City. To address your question, I think a bit of context matters. 2025 has been such an incredibly nice year for investors. Almost anything they touched, it made money. Global stocks are up 20% in US dollars. Latin American stocks are up almost 45% in US dollars. Global bonds, 10% positive. Latin American bonds, 15% positive. Before the election on Sunday, Argentina stocks and bonds were sharply down against the grain from the rest of the world. So you need to look at Monday's knee-jerk reaction in the context of a catch-up, right? Argentina having done so poorly up until the election, there was a lot of room for catching up. The question is, of course, what might happen moving forward? We think this Argentina catch-up trade has further room to run, in particular if we see a Milei with a more conciliatory tone, more consensus building, and that leverages this momentum to implement much needed reforms.
Thank you so much, Alejo. Let me just shift for a moment to Kezia. I'm going to come back to you on the markets, and then bring in Martin on the broader financial picture. But Kezia, behind markets, these elections, frankly, they reshape the political map. As I mentioned, he didn't win an outright majority, but enough seats to easily block veto overrides, which was a key priority for Milei going into the election. And Milei is now poised to be able to form alliances. I mentioned the outset to be able to pass key legislation. So what do these results mean for the ability to govern, push through reforms in the months ahead?
Well, thanks again for the invitation, Jason. What it means is that Milei still needs to forge alliances. He needs to, in some ways, trade confrontation for deal making. Yes, there is incredible momentum here after the resounding victory on Sunday. But as you said, there's still no outright majority. The Minister of Economy, Toto Caputo, while in Washington for World Bank IMF meetings, said at several events I attended, including the one you hosted at the Atlantic Council, that in some ways the exact electoral result wouldn't matter, because no matter what, the government, even in the most optimistic scenario, which did play out, the government would lack a simple majority, and that they'll need to work with the multiple provincial parties in the Congress and other allies to pass legislation. He was, of course, managing expectations, and things played out a lot better than they thought, and the momentum helps a lot. But no matter what, that deal making will be really important. There are risks going forward, of course, and that's what investors will be looking at. But the opportunity here is to pass a sort of structural reform agenda that can help make the Argentine economy more competitive. And there's actually a lot of consensus across the political spectrum in Argentina about what needs to be done. The government has been talking about doing fiscal reform, labor reform, and pension reform, which is the most complicated in that order. In the short term, they're going to be focused on passing the 2026 budget, and that will be a challenge. But over the next 2 years, the hope is to make progress on that structural reform agenda. There are some who question to what extent Milei is going to be able to forge those alliances, and given his very combative style. I think there have been some good signals. His recent meetings with former President Macri, his measured remarks on election night, and there's clearly pressure from the IMF, from the United States as well, and from investors, I should say, to improve governability, and because of the tensions leading up to the election, try to improve relations with the governors, which he'll need to make progress on this legislative agenda.
Well, and Kezia, he talked about that, as you mentioned. He talked about that on election night, right? I mean, President Milei in his speech, victory speech, essentially, reaffirmed the importance of governing for all Argentines. Very conciliatory, as you said. Talked about working with governors across the country. So this does reflect somewhat of a transition in how Milei has approached his kind of governing style. which, as you say, and I think Alejo, you mentioned this as well, the importance of kind of the conciliatory approach moving ahead.
I will add, there have been a lot of internal battles, as Argentines put it, internas within the administration. So a lot of the government relations professionals like myself will be watching over the coming weeks. How does the cabinet shift? Milei indicated that he's going to take his time, probably until the new Congress is inaugurated on December 10. But we will see, we will have to watch other signals in the coming weeks as to who remains where they are, what shifts happen, to get a sense of what that legislative strategy will be.
Thank you. Well, Martin, I'm going to bring you in here. You wrote for the Atlantic Council, and our experts react. You argued about the importance of the U.S. Treasury swap line that provides a critical backstop to now float the peso for good, remove restrictions for Argentine businesses, allow the exchange rate to gradually find a more stable long-term equilibrium. But as well, many are skeptical that the government will do so, confident in its own valuation bans regime. So what's your prediction as we are looking at this new, I would say, supercharged agenda? What's your prediction for the coming months on this really key front? And what's your advice that, insofar as what Argentina should do in this new period?
So I've been trying to characterize where Argentina stands right now. And if you think about transforming the economy into a market economy from what it has been before the last couple of decades, if that's the mountain, then probably the election outcome means that the Milei government has now reached base camp and can now set up the path for reforms and think about how to get to the summit. But that will take a long time. In the meantime, let's not forget that Argentina came out of a hyperinflation period, and the task was really to stabilize the economy before moving on to the reforms. Now, that task isn't quite complete yet. Inflation is still relatively high. I mean, it's come down from hyperinflation levels. But the government has been reluctant to let the exchange rate float because any kind of loss in confidence immediately translates into an increase in inflation if the exchange rate is weak. So that's been a key factor limiting the room before the midterm elections. Now they got 2 years until the presidential election, and ideally they would now allow for more flexibility. They would ideally let it float, but in order for inflation not to pick up again, they still need to run a really tight fiscal ship, and they need to of course, encourage growth so as to minimize the downside. The swap line is an important backstop, as I said. It kind of can be used to limit volatility. So I don't expect them to float it right away because the inflation concern will still be there. But hopefully, the band will not be such a kind of constraint anymore. Maybe the IMF can push a little bit for a widening or elimination of it. And ideally, we'd move to a float as soon as possible. Also, let's not forget, though, they also need to accumulate reserves to repay their foreign debt. So it's a complicated dance, but I really hope that they will take and get the courage to let it float more widely and pursue the reforms that are necessary to back that up.
Thanks, Martin. Before I go back to Alejo, one of the things you wrote yesterday was that you advised Milei to use the political and economic window of opportunity to advance structural reforms and assure that the promises lead to results for growth and jobs. From your perspective, what would you prioritize? What would you recommend that insofar as that Milei prioritizes as part of that structural reform of the economy?
Yeah, it's really a long list of things. When you say prioritize, I mean, yes, we talked about the pension system. I think labor market flexibility is important. There is trade restrictions that could be eliminated. There's a need to improve transport and energy infrastructure. It's a long list, and so far they've done a lot of things that they could do just with the votes they had and with the government's powers. I think they've done an excellent job on that. But now the heavy lifting comes, and for that they need partners, as Alejo and Kezia have said.
Yeah. So I want to go back to you on what the markets are looking at, right? So Kezia mentioned labor reform, fiscal reform, pension reform. Martin also mentioned labor reform, among other opportunities. When you also mentioned yesterday in our analysis that this result gives Milei the political capital to accelerate structural reforms. So which specific reforms, whether it's labor, whether it's tax, currency, what are investors most focused on as signs that this next phase will in fact deliver real change?
I think it's really all of the above. I loved Martin's analogy of base camp and how this is going to be a multi-year long process of normalizing an economy that has been distorted for the last 70 years, right? You're talking about many, many decades of mismanagement. But on top of the rightly listed labor reform, tax reform, pension reform, I will add overall deregulation of the economy. Federico Sturzenegger has been appointed to lead this effort that can be executed with executive power. Yes, legislative power helps, but you can do a lot from the perspective of the Casa Rosada, right? And they have been making progress, and now they have the political capital to make even more progress. So I would say from an investor perspective, you need to see a steady stream of announcements and implementation and legislative successes in the deregulation, followed by labor tax. These are the main priorities. Pension reform would be the icing on the cake, right? Much more complicated, much more convoluted, and entrenched interests. That would be, things that I would put in the above and beyond market expectations at this point, and make good use of, another 2 years of political capital ahead of the 2027 election. The hope of the investor community is that by 2027, the economy is in good enough footing that the political competition at the time is between La Libertad Avanza Milei and a moderate, pragmatic, pro-market version of Peronism, and in a way that the left tail of the political distribution is cut off. That would be, in a way, a very good outcome if you're thinking 2 years out.
Just a follow-up, Alejo, excellent points. I want to turn to you, Kezia, to talk a little bit more about that political map, even looking out for the next couple of years. But just first, Alejo, a follow-up question to you. What are some of the things that markets are looking at that would be concerning? We talked about the importance of passing labor, tax, pension being the cherry on top of the sundae, but what needs to be avoided to scare off potential investors?
I would highlight old habits dying hard in a way, right? If we see that Milei goes back to a very confrontational, right? A very inability to build bridges with those needed to just get those votes in Congress to approve very complicated structural reforms, that would be a red flag. I would add, from a global perspective, Argentina has had so much luck in 2025 because it has experienced difficulties domestically, but in a global context that has been very supportive. Weak dollar, a Fed central bank in the United States cutting interest rates. All of this, the situation could have been a lot worse had we not had a weak dollar and the Fed cutting. So if we see a change in the global dynamics, investors could be concerned that the degrees of freedom that Milei has are more constrained.
Keith, I want to go to you and talk a little bit about looking out for the next couple of years. But first, let's focus a little bit more on the short. I think one question that's been asked is what was the degree to which the Trump-Milei meeting 2 weeks before the election played into the resounding over 40% electoral victory for Milei, as well as, of course, the swap line announcement, I wrote that, of course, this is on the mind of voters. But what's your sense of the degree to which the degree to which the U.S. has been leaning in and really being supportive of Milei and of the economic reform and stabilization agenda? How did that factor into the election?
Yeah, good question. A lot of analysts are asking that very question. Look, I think we saw a mix of factors explaining Sunday's result. To me, most voters were probably motivated by antipathy towards the alternative, which is a very fragmented opposition. Peronism is remembered for the recurring economic crises. And the provincial election in Buenos Aires, province of Buenos Aires, September 7th, in a way, it served as a wake-up call in the end. But clearly, the U.S. support bolstered confidence in its absence, not to get into counterfactuals, but in its absence, Argentina seemed to be heading to a severe financial crisis, and it's very hard to imagine Libertad Avanza doing well in the midst of exchange rate volatility. The exchange rate has always been so politically sensitive in Argentina. And so, Besant's whatever it takes statement in September immediately halted that slide. And yes, there were still some market jitters in the immediate run up, but it was a real confidence boost that helped Milei avert bad financial conditions that really would have threatened his prospects on October 26th. The White House visit itself was unfortunately overshadowed by a comment by Trump at this impromptu press conference that played into the resignation of the foreign minister the week before the election as well. But all the same, it was still a historic show of support from the U.S. that I think did very much help Milei on election day.
And I had the opportunity to ask Mr. Caputo the next day when he was here at the Atlantic Council on that specific comment from the president. And
exactly,
as we discussed,
they spinned it in a good way that he was talking more about re-election in 2027. But all the same, I should also say that, of course, the vote really reflected the success with macroeconomic stabilization and everything Alejo and Martin have talked about. But inflation has been the issue of the times in Argentina, and so voters also gave Milei credit for his success there.
You also mentioned, I think, a really great point, Kizzy, in your response there, which is perhaps the loss on September 7th in the province of Buenos Aires helped to accelerate potentially the sizable win this past weekend. It served as a wake-up call because we saw the response from markets after the loss in Buenos Aires province. I want to go back to you on trade, but first, Martin, I want to bring you back in again. You've also argued over the coming 2 years, Milei's government should leverage this momentum to get the economy closer to liftoff speed, move from your base camp to liftoff. What areas would you recommend the government prioritize, particularly thinking about its commitments with the IMF?
So I realize we have mixed metaphors here, but I think the message is clear. I think what really needs to happen mostly is to make sure that the hardships that the Argentine population has gone through, Argentine citizens over the last 2 years, find a way to be mitigated, because it's been very hard on the population. Poverty has kind of gone up, although it's kind of now stabilizing somewhat. But that threat of renewed inflation hangs over the whole economy. And so one important thing would be to try and break the link between the exchange rate and inflation as much as possible. So anything that can be done in the labor market, for example, or government wages to break the indexation between the two would be very helpful. But at the same time, I think the government needs to be really careful about doing reforms with a social component in mind. So as to protect at least the people that are at the lowest levels of the income ladder. So that may not be necessarily what Milei's party would like to hear, but I think it's crucial for maintaining the support through these 2 years. Also, I mean, growth needs to go up as soon as possible. So there are some politically sensitive steps, like, for example, on trade. the licensing system and the like, that would really help. Kind of abolishing it would help strengthening export revenues, would help with the current account, and it's that complicated dance because between continued fiscal discipline, breaking the link between the currency and exchange and inflation, and then pursuing reforms in a way that they are socially and politically acceptable. So, I mean, I don't want to go through the list again, but there's a lot of things they need to do in parallel. And then I fully agree with Alejo. They also need to have the luck of those who are making good progress, which is that global conditions need to be in a way favorable to the Argentine economy.
I couldn't agree more, Martin. I want to, before I go back to you, Alejo, Kezia, Martin mentioned trade opportunities. And another key issue that we've been following very closely is the potentially imminent trade deal between the US and Argentina, which may open the market, US market further to Argentine products, and of course, also offer opportunities for US products in Argentina. So in this post-election context, what do you see insofar as the chances of this agreement being announced soon? What do you see as the potential contours of this agreement, and as well the sectors that might most benefit from such an agreement?
There have been rumors for months now, actually, especially in Buenos Aires, about an imminent trade deal between the two countries. The expectations have been created in interviews with the foreign minister, with the ambassador to the US, about any day that's happening, and yet I'm always getting questions from journalists about why is this delayed? We still haven't seen it. They've created that expectation, but they've also insisted, because of the very strict NDA they've signed with USTR, that they can't reveal any details about the scope. I think it would have been ideal to have had that announcement made on October 14th, the day of the White House visit. What I've also heard is that didn't happen because of President Trump's trip to the Middle East, and they needed still his sign off. And it's always a challenge, I think, to keep his attention when you don't have that action forcing event of a visit. He's now focused on Asia, obviously. So that may explain the delay. We're not sure, but by all accounts, it does indeed seem to be very close to an announcement, despite the uncertainty about the actual scope. US companies, some of whom I work with, have indeed been taking advantage of the opportunity of much increased leverage by the United States over Argentina because of this very close relationship, because of the financial support from Treasury, to put their problem issues in Argentina on the table. So they have been going to the US government over the last few months. One example is Argentina's notorious lack of intellectual property enforcement and protection. So there are obviously efforts to take advantage of these talks to make progress on some thorny issues like that can also be politically sensitive in Argentina. So it may actually be best that this is announced after the midterm elections. There's a question about, sectors. There's been a bit of a public dispute over beef exports. There may be some pushback from US farmers and ranchers, but Argentines would have loved to increase their quota into the US for beef exports. Obviously, Argentina is an agricultural powerhouse, so in some ways is more competitive with the United States. The US strategic interest in Argentina relates to its extractive industries. A lot of focus, obviously, in Washington on critical minerals, and a huge opportunity for Argentina to help meet global demand for copper and lithium, for example. I think there's a huge US role there to develop those resources. So critical minerals could be a focus here too, yet there's a limit to what Milei can promise the White House because the provinces in Argentina own the natural resources. So I'll be very interested to see what actually comes out. That's a bit of speculation on my part, but I would hope and expect that before the end of the year, yes, that we will have a trade deal.
Well, and you mentioned, Kezia, the importance of the president's sign off and the president's continued attention. I think one thing that we have seen is the administration, the president's attention, the secretary's attention, very laser focused on Argentina in a way that, frankly, we've never seen before from a U.S. administration. And so I think that seems like it further accelerates the potential that even with everything else going on in the world, that additional deals will continue to be made to move things forward. Again, especially with the sizable victory this past Sunday.
That helps too. I agree.
Alejo, I want to move back to you. You've highlighted the importance of turning some of the recently announced investment plans into concrete projects that support growth and employment, because that's ultimately what we want, right? We ultimately want opportunities to support the Argentine people's growth, economic stability for the Argentine people, employment opportunities, and opportunities for the U.S. and Argentina to have an even closer relationship. When you look at those investment plans, what are some sectors or projects that you see? And Kezia talked about a couple different sectors just now as a part of a potential trade deal. But what are some sectors or products that you see as most critical for achieving structural transformation? And how soon might investors see or want to see or expect to see tangible results?
Yes, let me maybe pick up on something you highlighted that shouldn't be understated. The U.S. Treasury's focus on Argentina is truly historic in nature. You've never seen this before. Direct U.S. Treasury support for an emerging market country, direct purchases of local currency of an emerging market country in FX markets. I think the closest analogy might be Mexico in 1994, tequila crisis, but even then, it was orchestrated through IMF and through other vehicles. It wasn't as direct. So as you pointed out, Jason, laser focus, very unique, and with this victory, likely that will continue. Regarding investments, Kezia mentioned some key areas. The world is changing. We're in a more fragmented geoeconomic environment. We are in a more tense, conflicted global backdrop, and therefore the importance of food security, energy security, critical mineral security increases drastically. And Argentina has everything needed to become a key player in all these areas. So much productive land for grain exports, so many demonstrated reservoirs of oil and gas, Vaca Muerta and others, critical minerals in the north west of the country, right? Lithium, copper, potentially others, right? And so I think there's a great opportunity for the country to exploit all of this on top of the very high quality of human capital that there is in Argentina. Business process outsourcing has been something that the country has managed to do pretty well historically, and I think can do a lot better moving forward. In terms of untapping these opportunities, Jason, my mental framework of how capital flows and investor behavior transpires when countries turn the corner is the first thing to move is locals invest in financial assets, then foreigners invest in financial assets, then locals invest in real assets, and finally and lastly, foreigners invest in real assets. I think we're entering that fourth phase, and this election might sediment, interest conditional on the approval of reforms.
Thank you, Alejo. Let me pick back up again the excellent spotlight. Martin, I want to bring you in and kind of contextualizing as well the U.S. focus and as well as kind of the continued IMF focus on Argentina. But just a follow-up question for you, Alejo. Walk us through a little bit specific sectors or specific projects that you see as the most ripe for additional investment at this time. You mentioned that food security, energy security, critical minerals, and possible to do everything at once. So where do you see the prioritization, and where do you see the first kind of tangible additional results to come out? There was an important announcement, I think it was OpenAI that announced right before the election as well. So what additional announcements do you expect to see in specific sectors?
So that was for me or for Martin?
For you, Alejo.
Excellent. Yeah. So look, I think part of the philosophy of the Milei administration is let this be market driven. Let's build the conditions for money to come and private capital to decide exactly what to prioritize. I think from a what are the conditions that are ripe for attracting those investments? Oil and gas in Patagonia, Argentina. This has been happening and can be turbocharged. The extraction of lithium, copper, and other critical minerals in the northern part of Argentina, that has been happening. Primarily Chinese investments. This can become a more balanced portfolio of capital flowing into this region. Agri-tech, pretty advanced in Argentina with a long track record. But with the AI revolution, this can only deepen over time with the right capital allocation. Finally, we've seen the success of companies that exploit incredible human capital in the software development, in the finance world. So many global banks with hubs in Argentina, so many software development firms with hubs in Argentina, and people working out of there to lower developing costs, right? So I think you should look at all of that. You highlighted OpenAI's investment. This is new, right? We hadn't seen this kind of interest before. Again, the raw materials for this to flourish are there. We need to see labor reform, tax reform. We need to see an exchange rate that allows companies to have the confidence that this is no Hotel California, right? You can get in and you can get out.
Yeah, incredibly important. Love the analogy. Martin, feel free to pick up on Alejo's answer, but also can you help us to further contextualize, the importance of, the continued IMF support of Argentina? What does the election results mean for those programs moving forward? And also contextualize, the U.S. support, as we were talking about, and how unique it is within the broader kind of regional, also the broader global context. I can't remember seeing the Treasury Secretary sending out tweets on at least a weekly basis on one particular country. So help us to contextualize what this means and how these results what these results mean then as well for that future engagement.
Yeah, so from the IMF's perspective, they have now a chance to work together with an administration, or I mean, they've already been doing it, but with an administration that kind of owns reforms. Government ownership of a program is really important to lead to an eventual success. I think this program at the beginning, as well as the last one, which was in a way disastrous because the Peronist government really didn't care much about any conditions that the IMF tried to put forward, and it was really a rollover, has been more like to help avoid the default of Argentina on the IMF. So Argentina needed fresh loans in order to repay the old ones, which in principle the IMF shouldn't do. And if so, then there should be decent conditions attached to it. Now, I think we're getting back to a situation now where this is not just an extension of maturities through the back door, but that there is some genuine movement now in the Argentine economy. So the fund can play an important role in helping to balance the reform momentum with maintaining stability on the macro front. Now, the US position, I mean, it would be too easy to say that, well, there's this ideological affinity between the two presidents that drives a lot of that collaboration. I think there's a genuine geopolitical interest of the United States in making sure that Argentina blossoms, retains stability politically and economically. and doesn't throw itself to a country like China that would love to swoop up some of the geopolitical assets, not just energy and the like, but also, who knows, ports and other assets there at the southern tip of the Western Hemisphere. At the same time, the US needs to be careful that the support that they're providing now is not being seen as like an imperial grab down there in South America. So by that, I mean that it would be important that the US keeps in mind that Argentina needs to grow and needs to diversify its economy. And yes, it needs to have relations with other countries too. Where I think the US administration should draw a line in terms of talking to the Argentinian government is when it comes to geopolitical assets. And I think there I could see a deal that says, look, we're on the same kind of spectrum of politics. We're kind of, in a way, Western Hemisphere democracies. We need to work together and make sure that we're strong enough together to withstand the entreaties of for example, China in securing important inroads into Latin America, which they're also doing in other countries, of course.
Yeah.
So that's a natural alliance here, but I think it needs to be handled carefully also by the US administration.
Thank you, Martin. And you brought up China. We have about 5 minutes left, and important to bring China into this conversation. Milei, of course, strengthened incredibly strong US-Argentina trade relations. Argentina, of course, still maintains its economic links with China. And this was a conversation topic when President Milei and Trump met at the White House, if there's any conditionality around U.S. assistance. At the same time, we've seen in the U.S. press concerns about the extent of Argentine soybean complex exports to China. I think topping about a quarter. Of course, this also comes at the time that U.S. Soy exports to China are decreasing because of ongoing trade frictions. Help us to figure out, why is this happening? How the China-Argentina relationship, and how kind of maybe I'll turn to you, maybe Alejo first, or Martin, feel free, or any of you feel free to pick this up on how does Buenos Aires strike that balance? You can't after years of building those economic linkages with China, you can't just cut them off. So how does Buenos Aires find that balance between closer engagement with the U.S. while also having to maintain its relationship with China and other global partners at the same time?
This is a reality that most Latin American countries and many others in the emerging world need to balance. It's not an easy situation because, as you highlighted, Jason, it's been 25 years of very, very active Chinese economic involvement in Latin America. This cannot be unraveled overnight, and the US should not expect something of that nature. I think Milei in particular has been remarkably pragmatic. One thing was electoral rhetoric in his 2023 campaign and the terms that he used to refer to China. Something very different was his actions while in office. And this has so far allowed him to strike that balance, maybe better than other countries such as Brazil have been able to in recent weeks. Nonetheless, it's going to remain a sticking point. And it's just about communicating actively and talking to the US so as to list priorities and be able to, walk and chew gum at the same time.
Thanks, Alejo.
Yeah, if I may come in, this is precisely what I meant by saying that the US should focus on essential items that they expect in return from Argentina. If for example, they would hypothetically, if they would force Argentina not to sell soybean to China, it would be such a blow to the Argentine economy that it would undo much of the steps and successes that have happened in the past. That's a totally hypothetical argument, of course. But similarly, I mean, the US needs to make sure that Argentina has a pathway to higher growth and really strong stability. And then they also have a partner they can work with better in Latin America. That's a transition phase. And they need to be really careful not to kind of be seen as obstructing Argentina's progress.
Thank you. Kezia.
Totally agree. Argentina can't afford to cut off export revenues to China. They're too dependent on them, and it would be destabilizing for the economy. They'll have to be tightrope walkers as they navigate a very close relationship with the US, downplay any kind of high-level engagement with the Chinese, but they still need them. I will also just say on the mining sector, because I'm doing a lot of work there, there's a really unique opportunity right now for the United States to make sure that Western companies are the ones developing, especially the copper resources. Argentina is one of the few countries in the world with that potential, and where the Chinese, they're a little bit more into lithium, but not copper. It's all Western companies. So I think through DFC and other tools, the US can help also address the infrastructure deficit because there's a lot of investment that needs to be done in infrastructure to support those mining projects.
Yeah, Kezia, great last point, and I'll bring that home to the Atlantic Council and our work. We've been doing a lot of work here over the course of the year on the DFC and how the DFC can be kind of that reauthorization process can look like, so that we're the institutions even better equipped to be able to finance critical projects across the region, especially those that will further position U.S. investors, U.S. companies. I want to end by thanking you, Kezia, Martin, Alejo, for your incredible insights over the course of the last 45 minutes, and frankly, all the insights you provided before this conversation, and as you've continued to provide afterwards as well. And also for all of our viewers watching this show, please stay tuned for more from the Atlantic Council on Argentina. We recognize here this incredible moment of transformation, and we'll continue to do our part to see how we can ensure that this incredible moment that we're seeing helps to bring long-term economic benefits for the country, for the Argentine people, looking out not only over the course of the next 2 years, but looking far beyond the next 2 years. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.